That time I got reincarnated as a demon lord. English, by LordedoMal44. 45 The Ogre Village Battle P4 The Ogre Chief was completely immobile, unable to move in the face of the pressure his opponent was emitting. No, actually it would be better to say that every instinct in her body was telling her the same thing. If he moved now, the creature in front of him would charge forward and take his life. That's why he had no way of gathering strength and advancing. Of course, as the strongest ogre he could move if the situation really called for it, only he knew it was no advantage to do so now. For now, how about we just enjoy the show? And then, to the boss's surprise, and everyone present, the thing in front of him, which he was barely sure what it was, simply sat down on the ground, as if it had not even the slightest interest in the battle. She just smiled, directing her gaze to the field where the two groups were fighting, as if she could see the battle taking place dozens of meters away. Why? Don't you wish to fight? If it were you, then perhaps our village would have been crushed a long time ago. The boss asked this, confused by the behavior the thing in front of him had. In response he only received a confused look. And what's the point of that? If Rimuru wanted to crush you with brute force and say, surrender or die, then he would do it himself. That's the level of power he has. The head of the ogres was even more surprised, hearing such words from the entity in front of him. The woman in front of him, apparently one of the legendary Kijin, who are a rare evolution of their people, spoke of her master as if he were more powerful than she was. For the head of the ogres, imagining a creature in this forest that was more powerful than this woman was an impossible job. When it came to spells, not even the forest caretaker, Trainee the Dryad, could be a match for this Kijin. Thus, how strong is your master? The boss asked, narrowing his eyes as he tried to gauge her response. He knew that he couldn't tell if she was speaking the truth or a lie just by her words, but he still wanted to know how her reaction would be when faced with such a question. And her reaction was just to smile, as if this was all a big joke. He's strong enough that all of this is still pretty boring. The truth is, it's just that he's already limited himself, so he can't fight seriously. After all, if he fights. Before Kijin could continue, a strong wind blew, specifically around her. Those present could clearly feel, in this wind, the magic of someone acting, that person who had identified himself as Rimuru before. Even from this distance, everyone understood that the Rimuru had not only heard everything, but that he could even attack if he so desired. Well, it looks like he wants me to shut up, so let's just enjoy the show. Gobuta was standing in front of the two ogres, father and daughter, with a furious look on his face. The two's only reaction to this was to see, with apprehensive eyes, was to stand still, on guard, with all their attention focused on Gobuta. The pressure that Gobuta was emitting from his body, at the moment, surpassed that of an ogre, and his body leaked with a strange killing intent. Despite this, Gobuta managed to control himself enough not to charge at the two. Before I start, you girl, Gobuta shouted this, pointing at the ogre's daughter with his armored hand. The ogress, hearing this, became even more on her guard than before, but she still didn't take any action. It was better to hear what he had to say to her before she took rash action. Unfortunately, even though I wanted to crush both of you, I won't be the one fighting you. I'll only be fighting that little guy over there. The ogress was surprised by these words, becoming confused. Despite that, she still didn't let her guard down, even after being told that he didn't plan on fighting her. There was a chance that this was just a trick of his, and even if it wasn't, she would still have to fight him alongside her father if he didn't have a good reason not to fight her. I will not be your opponent. Exactly. Thanks, Gobuta-kun. I'll be her opponent. I want to test if she's a good opponent worthy of Rimuru-sama. Hearing these words from the shadows in a far corner, the two ogres watched in amazement as a woman stepped out of the shadows. She had the look of a teenager at best, but they knew they couldn't judge an opponent on that alone. Her appearance might be young, but they weren't even able to feel aura coming out of her body, as if she wasn't even there. Indeed, they could see her with their normal eyes, but she was totally invisible to their magic perception. Despite that, or because of that, they both knew instinctively that this female Majin was an even greater danger than the strange armored goblin in front of them. And while the two thought about it, Seal, apparently unaware of the two's thoughts, or just not caring, continued talking, not really caring about the two's opinion of his battle offer. Come with me. Let's fight somewhere else. Seal muttered those words and then started walking, turning his back on the ogre without even checking to see if she was following. The ogress and her father stood for a moment, watching as the Majin walked away. The decision wasn't as easy to make for both of them as it seemed to be for her. After all, the father knew that his daughter wasn't strong enough to face that Majin. Even so, they were on the battlefield, and they had two opponents against two opponents, that is, they had no real option. After all, the worst possible scenario would be having to face the goblin and the Majin at the same time, since the two are stronger and could cover their own backs. Very well, daughter. Take your time, and when I'm done, I'll help you. If you finish before then, come help me. Of course. And you better not miss it, Dad, or I'll tell my mom. The ogre smiled awkwardly as he felt a chill just imagining his wife's reaction to possible defeat. Of course, he could say that he was already injured and that's why he lost to the goblin, but knowing his wife, he knew that the real chances of something like this succeeding were practically zero. With that, the ogress lowered her weapons, not afraid of being attacked, and started to follow Seal, not looking back. She didn't have time to worry about her father anymore, not when such a strong opponent wanted to face her personally. As he watched his daughter walk away from the battlefield, the ogre couldn't help but slightly regret his decision to charge across the battlefield without a second thought as he had. If it weren't for that, maybe they wouldn't be involved in these impossible level battles. Despite this, he was unwilling to change. His motto was that the best defense is a good offense, and that is something he would never change. Well, now that she's gone with Seal-san, how about we get started? I paid my debt to Seal-san for letting me know about the fight between you and Akami, so I don't have to hold back anymore. Gobuta said this, moving the joints of his arms and legs as if to test them, before getting into a fighting stance, holding his sword in both hands. Now. I have to break your face, Sue. Ahahaha. Why such a hurry? Well, I'm anxious too, so, let's go. Excited by the start of the fight, the ogre charged forward, swinging his warhammer towards the Gobuta before bringing it down at high speed. Once again, he had started the battle. The ogress felt apprehensive as she walked away from the battlefield. Of course, she knew the enemy didn't want to kill anyone. They had already had countless chances to do so and they hadn't taken advantage of them. Furthermore, she also knew that her father was a strong and honorable ogre warrior, and that he would not let himself be lost so easily. Despite that, she realized, just by looking at the goblin from before, she could tell that his bond with the goblin from before was romantic, so there was a chance that he would be blinded due to rage that they had fought his girlfriend and could end up killing your father. If his strength was taken into account, at least among what could be felt, then that goblin had a real chance of victory. Even so, she couldn't let the Majin be on the same battlefield as her father. The chances of winning, in this case, would be less than zero. At least, if she bought a little time with the Majin, her father could go face Rimuru and end this war. Give up. Rimuru is even stronger than me. Looking in surprise at the Majin, who seemed to have just read her mind, the ogress narrowed her eyes even further. Yes, she had already thought about that possibility, of how strong Rimuru, the leader of a group like that, could be. The chance that he was being helped by one of the demon lords had increased even more, but if that wasn't the case, as he claimed, then he must have been a very powerful Majin himself. Exactly. Rimuru is much stronger than you can imagine. Oh, really? The ogress smirked as she stopped walking. If that's so, then why did he need all of you to come to the ogre village? Why didn't he defeat us alone? I guess if he's as strong as you are then he would probably be able to subdue us. Indeed, he would be. The ogress was surprised to hear those words, her eyes widening. Was Rimuru, the enemy leader, powerful enough to defeat them all? So why did he do all this unnecessary battle? The stronger he becomes, the more he feels that things get easier. Therefore, Rimuru wants to experience close battles, even if he has to hold back in a fight. If contain. Yes. Hold back. The Majin in front of her continued talking, almost as if she were a teacher, proud to be teaching a student with trouble keeping up with her teachings. In part, it could just be her boastful voice, but the ogress felt that there was more to it, as if the Majin herself was not an ordinary person. I'm holding back myself. Otherwise, in my battle with potential candidates, I wouldn't find results. And then, the ogress got angry. She was weak, she knew that. She knew that the moment the fight started, she would end up losing this battle. At least, that was what every instinct in her body told her. Her mind was fighting the constant urge to run away, to leave this woman behind, just to keep fighting with pride. But that your opponent is holding back. Don't act like I'm less than you. Without controlling her actions, the ogress advanced with all her strength, almost disappearing to the human eye, and appearing close to where the Majin was. She covered her club with as much of her aura as possible, determined to bring it down in a single strike if that was possible, and if not, she would keep attacking until it fell. As your father used to say, the best defense is a good offense. I'm not acting. Turning around in the blink of an eye, faster than the ogress was able to react, the Majin made a simple movement, something the ogress had not imagined. She casually placed her hand in the path of the club. She didn't even seem to have put in enough strength to stop the attack, she just put her hand in the way as if she was shielding her eyes from something that was too bright. The club made contact, and the ogress's aura exploded against the Majin's hand. The Majin's hand didn't move an inch, holding the ogress's club. Lacks control, but has potential, most powerful attack yet. The Majin spoke, as if mechanically confirming facts from a list. Her voice was almost devoid of emotion, as if she wasn't a living being. Initiating test of enemy defense. The Majin muttered this and raised her hand high, as if pointing to the sun, and, in the next moment, her hand came down towards the ground. A crater opened. The ogre attacked the armored goblin with all his might, using the hammer in a downward slash. This was his strongest attack, the one he was recognized for, even among ogres. His strength, in the past, had been enough to bring down the lesser mountain dragons in times of need. An attack that added the force of gravity, the hammer's weight, and the body's natural strength before adding a high-powered aura attack. Even wearing armor, the goblin felt that being hit by a blow like that would be a bad development for the start of the battle, so he decided to avoid the blow. So, in a quick move, the goblin decided to minimize the damage, using one of his hands, with all his strength, to deflect the hammer's movement. Of course, that wouldn't work, the ogre knew that. The force behind this attack was gigantic. To deflect a blow like that, the strength required would be monstrous. And when the two made contact, amazingly, the hammer changed direction. The ogre felt the dull impact surge, as a force equal to his own knocked his hammer off the course he had launched, all with the impact of a hand. He had nothing to do but stare, knowing that with all the strength he had put in, he couldn't move properly until the attack was over. And then he saw how, with the other hand, the goblin attacked him with the sword. Using all his strength, the ogre shifted his body a little to the side, preventing the blow, which was aimed at his shoulder, from hitting him. At the same time, he felt his hammer hitting the ground, with enough force to create a crater in the area around him and his enemy. Normally, people would be shaken after the ground beneath their feet was broken like this, but the goblin didn't. Instead, he didn't even move, as if his feet were fixed to the ground. And then, he attacked again. Assuming a fighting stance with the sword, a weapon much lighter and easier to use than his warhammer, the ogre watched as the goblin hurled his sword at his chest again. This time he aimed right in the center, enough that he didn't have a chance to dodge the incoming attack. But he wouldn't just let himself get hit. Moving only the handle of his hammer, while the hammerhead, the heaviest part of the hammer, was still stuck in the ground, the ogre placed the handle in front of the sword's blade and he forced the sword to change direction. As soon as he managed to dodge the attack, he put strength in his legs and lunged backwards, gaining distance from his opponent. As soon as he opened the distance again, he once again assumed a fighting stance, seeing the way his enemy just stood still. As expected, coming in that armor was a bad idea. I'm sorry, Z. I didn't mean for you to end up hurt like that. The goblin muttered this, as if he were talking to his own armor, as he looked down at his hand. His hand, which had defended the hammer, had a huge crack, the result of the power of both attacks clashing against the power of the armor. If the goblin still had his own hand, then it must only be because he had physical strength as great as his and had added his own aura to the blow. Still, the ogre felt a strange sensation, as if the goblin in front of him had a strange aura emanating from him, an aura that was irritated, but in relation to himself. An aura that didn't belong to him. I already apologized to you, Z, I promise I won't use you like that anymore. You're better because of the strength I have when I use you, but you're not the best choice when I'm fighting an opponent as strong as the two of us Sue. The ogre was even more puzzled, seeing how the goblin was having a conversation with himself. It was almost as if his armor was alive, And then, to further heighten how strange this situation was, wah! The shadow at the goblin's feet began to swirl in a swirl, with numerous monster shapes in it. Despite that, the goblin seemed calm. Okay. Let's show him all the power of our knight.